Hello and welcome. I am Exolite and this is my channel. Today we're going to discuss the mysterious disappearance of a park ranger who was working, went out to check on the trails to make sure there was no hikers there, to check on a piece of land that the national park had just acquired, and was never seen again. Disappeared without a trace. Before we get started, if you are not subscribed and you would like to be, please go ahead and push that button. Also, if you would please go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, I would greatly appreciate that. And if you would like to be notified when my content goes live, go ahead and click that bell. Let's talk about the disappearance of Paul Fugate, shall we? In the very remote Chiricahua Mountains of southeastern Arizona, which appears to look like the landscape of a foreign planet. It's mostly well known for what is called the Chiricahua National Monument, which is a mysterious and odd placement of massive boulders, seemingly placed delicately one upon the other, yet withstanding the test of time, man, and weather. This is where Paul Fugate, who was then 41, had been working for many years. In 1980, Paul was employed as a law enforcement ranger and had been well acclimated to the area. He knew the trails. He was very well known for his knowledge of the land and the dangers of the land. In fact, he was widely known as an enthusiastic ranger, a consummate adventurer, an experienced hiker, a very knowledgeable person of the terrain and the geology of the region. He was seen as a dedicated and honorable member of the Ranger Service. On Sunday afternoon, January 13th, 1980, Paul told the seasonal part-time staff member he was working with that he was going to go out on the trail that led to the newly acquired 400-acre parcel of land. The trail was only a short distance to the new parcel, and it wasn't unheard of that a ranger would go out and make sure that there weren't any people on the trail still hiking. Paul left somewhere between 2 and 3. The ranger station was to close at 5, and he told this part-time employee to go ahead and start closing at 4:30, even if he hadn't come back yet. Paul headed out with a weapon, a gun, and his radio. There was no need to think that anything was different on this day than any other day. This was a seasoned park ranger. He was walking along a well-marked trail in broad daylight. It didn't seem dangerous. Didn't seem like anything bad would happen. He waved goodbye casually, and he went off on what was to be a very short hike. There would have been no problem with him coming back by 5. He easily would have made that. Yet Paul was never seen again. After Paul did not come back, a search was launched that would come to be one of the largest ever in that area. It included tracking dogs, aircraft, hundreds of law enforcement personnel from various agencies, including the National Park Service, the Cochise County Sheriff's Department, and the Bureau of Land Management, the U.S. Forest Service, the Southern Arizona Search and Rescue Association, as well as volunteers and family who scoured the trail to Fairway Ranch to find no trace of this man. The search went and expanded up to 17 square miles of this rough and rugged terrain. It was meticulously searched. There was no evidence that he'd ever been there. He simply disappeared. There was a $5,000 reward placed for Paul, which quickly went up to $20,000. There were still no leads. The only promising clue was that a friend of Paul's said that he had seen Paul in his truck between two men, and he seemed to be unconscious, that he was slumped over. A friend of Paul's was an ex-police officer. He didn't recognize the men in the vehicle with Paul, didn't know the driver, and he had passed him, and apparently it didn't strike him as something to be concerned about, because he didn't turn around, he didn't follow Paul's truck. Although law enforcement believed that he probably didn't see what he thought he saw, that perhaps there was a trash bag or something between the two men at the speeds that they were passing each other, that it might have made it impossible for him to really identify that that was Paul. So even that they couldn't cling to as very much hope. Some people think that Paul must have stumbled across some drug dealers in the area and they murdered him or kidnapped him. But there was never any evidence of that. And why would they murder him? Murdering the park ranger brought down an intense search for the man, and you would have to know that would happen. Then there was the idea that perhaps he was attacked by an animal, or fell down and was injured. But, like I said, this was one of the largest searches that had ever happened in the history of the area, and it was meticulously searched by multiple law enforcement agencies, by air, by land. Nothing was found. No clothing, not his radio. There was no evidence at all that he had succumbed to an animal attack, or that he had been injured, drug away, or fallen anywhere. Some people thought that perhaps he had wandered out of the search area, which was a 17-mile search area, when the trail to this newly acquired land was very short. In the middle of the day, well groomed, no reason at all to wander off, let alone go beyond a 17 square mile radius. The one thing about this case that I should mention is 3 years previous to this, Paul had been disciplined by the National Park Service, his supervisors, because he refused to trim his facial hair. He had to fight and go to court to retain his job. And the Park Service was none too happy about that. In fact, when he disappeared, the Park Service was very quick to label him voluntarily missing and took action to fire him again for being AWOL. They forced his widow to repay the paycheck she received after his disappearance. Now, keep in mind that the National Park Service didn't actually declare Paul dead until 1986. So that was 6 years later. 6 years worth of paychecks. His wife was, frankly, obviously, very furious. Dodie released a statement that said the government would investigate if a Navajo woman's dress was missing, and I'm assuming she meant had been taken out of the visitor center. I think Paul is worth more than a dress, and I don't think the federal government is concerned about what happened to him. Now remember, as I've said in other videos, in a National Park Service, everything ultimately comes down to the FBI. They are the ultimate law enforcement in a missing persons case on national ground. And Dodie was very vocal that she did not believe that the FBI took the case seriously enough and didn't search long enough. As we know with the National Park Services, when somebody goes missing, the search usually lasts anywhere between a few days to sometimes a few months. Usually it's wrapped up in a couple of weeks, which makes missing people a completely different experience in a national park system than had somebody gone missing walking down a sidewalk, because the search is oftentimes called over and assumed that the person is probably dead within a few weeks. Dodie had a problem with that, as do many families of people who go missing in the national park system. In what is a very strange twist to the story, and really backs up his wife's gut feeling about this case, is that in June of 2018, almost 4 decades after Paul went missing, the National Park Service suddenly, without warning, without announcement, reopened this case and increased the reward for Paul, or information about Paul, to $60,000. They cited the discovery of promising new evidence, but they will not release what that evidence is. It does seem odd that a case that old would be reopened. The reward money increased by such a large amount, and that the Park Service won't release what their evidence is. So, what happened to Paul Fugate? When Paul walked off that trail, that open trail, at 2 to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, broad daylight, in January, it wasn't hot, he wasn't going to get heat stroke, to walk a short distance to this new parcel of land. What happened? Did Paul see something he shouldn't have seen? Was there something on the land that he shouldn't have seen? Why was he written off as AWOL so quickly by the Park Service, and so cruelly? What happened to Paul Fugate? He had a weapon. During the search, he could have shot off his weapon. People would have heard it. They would have found him. It's likely that if he had been really a short distance from the ranger station, if he had shot his weapon, that the part-time employee would have heard him. How do you go missing without a trace? How does that happen? And why is this case open again? And if you have any information, you can call the National Park Service or the FBI. Thank you for coming to my channel. Good night.